Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Eric Wolf again. And for our very first session here at FoodTreX Global 2021, I am delighted, and I think we should all feel very grateful that one of the world's leading experts on gastrodiplomacy, if not the leading expert in the world, Johanna Mendelson Forman, is here with us today. And Johanna is a busy woman. She has 3 talks today, so she has carved out some time from her very busy schedule to share her expertise with us. And this is a fascinating subject, gastrodiplomacy. I am really looking forward to what you have to say, Johanna. So by all means, just go ahead and get started. I'll close off myself and let's see what you have to say. Thank you.
Well, Eric, good morning, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Eric and I have another affinity in that Eric graduated from the School of International Service. So I'm particularly honored to be with an alum who's done such wonderful work in the food and travel space. The topic this morning, and I'm going to resume my screen share. I hope you can see it. Let me just get the slideshow going. Here, slideshow. Okay, let's get it started.
Just from the beginning there on the far left, Johanna.
Yeah, from the beginning. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you so much. It's early in the morning in Washington for me. So, Eric, thank you for helping me. As Eric mentioned, the topic that we discussed was what hospitality professionals need to know about gastrodiplomacy, but I suspect you know a lot already. But I wanted to just give you a little bit of a sense of what I'm going to talk about, because I always love this quote. It was from an Italian pastry chef who was in the Sudan, actually, and went to work with women, teaching them to use local food and sustainable products to bake in that area. And I just thought this quote from this woman, after a short time, the language of our hands and of our tools, this is the tacit communication between us arose, and we did not need any linguistic translation because we were speaking through our gestures. But I think this really tells us a lot about what has happened to food. And it really is true in my own lifetime and in yours that just the way we were all wowed by the internet in the 90s, for those of you who can remember that far back, I certainly can, not my students, but I can, that food is really the internet of the 21st century. It connects us, it creates a universal language, and that is really quite an amazing factor that has occurred within our lifetimes and certainly should be good to this industry. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about what I was going to say today, because I wanted to just show you that we're going to talk about the ways food has emerged to promote greater cultural understanding. We're going to show you a few statistics, not many because it's early, but certainly tells the power of food in tourism, which you probably know. We're going to talk about food as soft power for those of you who want to get wonky this morning. And we're going to speak a little bit more about sustainable tourism as a growing concern among those who really are wanting to do something about threats such as climate change, water shortages, food waste. And as Eric mentioned in his previous presentation, I will just reference a little bit about how COVID has changed the way we approach food tourism, but not necessarily in a negative way. So let's go to some numbers that I've gotten out of the Food Travel Monitor, which is a product of the World Food Travel Association. I think these numbers that certainly destinations benefit from tourism related to food. More and more people are traveling. 53% of them are traveling with food as the destination. And I think the most interesting, which confirms other trends we know, is that millennials are seeking out socially responsible restaurants. And this is an extremely important trend because it's promoting many things that we see abroad. From the United States, we're seeing more vegan restaurants, more vegetarian restaurants, and we're seeing more people, not only millennials, but people who are older than millennials, wanting to look at locally sourced food. But the role of millennials driving the food craze is certainly true. So how has food developed as a tool of statecraft? Culinary diplomacy is obviously the way to go. I'm sure you're all aware that culinary diplomacy, like nation branding and gastrodiplomacy and social gastronomy, a term I'll deal with later, are forms of soft power. And I'm sure that you also realize that soft power is non-coercive power. Governments exercise it, citizens exercise it. And food in diplomacy is one of those powers. This is a picture, by the way, of Samantha Powers when she was the US representative to the United Nations at a dinner for two Afghan refugees at her home when she was in New York. But I always think it's a nice picture because it shows how food is the power of persuasion. But also, I think what's important is that food and cuisine are an instrument of cross-cultural understanding. And the pictures here of Roosevelt and Churchill and Stalin during the Second World War at dinners was a very important part of the way Allies were negotiating the end of the Second World War. There were three summits. There's a wonderful book on culinary diplomacy called Churchill's Dinners, which describes this, but very, very important in creating non-conflictive atmosphere where people could sit down and talk about the challenges they faced in the Second World War. The lower picture is, of course, President Obama's last state dinner for the Indian president. And this is interesting because I will get into it a little more, but state dinners have lost favorability. State dinners in the past opened up our way to China. This is the famous picture of Nixon and Chow En-lai, and look, I love the picture of him looking at what he's picking up with chopsticks, and the famous menu from that dinner. But one of the interesting features of that was that the American passion for Chinese food, for food that really came out of the country of China from many regional areas, arose after the opening, and in many parts it had to do with this famous first dinner. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that, but food is really a part of public diplomacy. And when you think about that, I distinguish gastrodiplomacy as follows. If you look at the last point, gastrodiplomacy leverages the power of kitchens as a venue of foreign policy. This has always been the thesis of what I talk about, because indeed the kitchen has become, like the internet, a place where people can come around, share ideas, and create community. But in the official sense, it's a form of public diplomacy that citizens use to promote food and cuisines. And that's exactly what people in the travel industry, people working in the food space are doing. They are diplomats in their own right, and they are using their agency to be able to promote agendas around food. Most recently, I think, and what's interesting in the idea of gastrodiplomacy is that it's become a part of people using it to promote national agendas for tourism. That's nation branding. And it's also been used during the refugee crises to create new training opportunities for people coming abroad. So we'll look at each of those, but I just wanted to give you some examples of what I mean by gastrodiplomacy. So, of course, I couldn't miss an opportunity to put the late Anthony Bourdain here, but I mean, what he's doing is citizen food diplomacy. He was in Turkey, he was tasting a kebab and looking pretty like Anthony Bourdain. These are interesting also because food trucks are an example of gastrodiplomacy. Here's the kebab house, the souvlaki shop. These trucks sit in front of the American Museum, the Smithsonian on Washington. And it's interesting that they are there all the time and people rush out to them and eat every day when the museum was open. And then, as I mentioned, refugee chefs in the diaspora community have also used food in a gastrodiplomacy sense. Here's a picture of my Laotian friend who runs Foodini, a refugee food program in Washington that offers delivery of meals. And I can tell you a little bit more about that. During COVID, he did very well. He was one of the people prepared to do food delivery. And another picture of food trucks, people online in another part of Washington trying to buy their very international cuisines. And also, food diplomacy around refugees is important because it is a way for people to learn about other countries. We learn about other countries through our palates. And today, many travelers already know the tastes of places they want to go to. And they learn a lot about this from diasporas and refugees who bring the recipes to our own country. So when you travel, you want an experience of the local food scene that's real. And across the United States, of course, we are having a lot of that thanks to all the different refugee companies, tour companies that are working, and tour companies that are taking people on street tours. I just saw recently that Culinary Backstreets had resumed its tours in Queens, New York, one of the most ethnically diverse boroughs in the city of New York. Now, I have this picture of this cookbook here, not to shamelessly promote something I was an editor of, but because refugee cookbooks, if you go on Amazon, have flourished. In the last 2 years, there are about 30 new cookbooks. And that's because a cookbook is really something that somebody can reproduce a recipe from. But creating a cookbook from people who come with recipes as oral traditions is difficult and is a way in which people learn how to make food that otherwise would not be accessible to them. So I am a big believer that cookbooks and recipes and stories are a good way to promote later travel because it piques people's curiosity and taste buds. So let me go quickly to nation branding because, of course, this is what states use to promote indigenous cuisines. What's interesting about the whole nation branding phenomena, it's one, a form of gastrodiplomacy, but it was also a way for small states to distinguish themselves. You know, we have the big five around the table of the Security Council. We have the other states, 8 states that are the other voted members, but many countries want to turn their food into tourism promotion. And this has been one of the most successful ways to bring people to a country. The oldest, let me just see, then the other way that you can get people to a country is through the Cultural Heritage Program. The Intangible Cultural Heritage designation on food, which has taken place since about 2003, is a powerful draw. Just the way we go see sites around the world, we go eat food in countries that are designated to have these cultural heritages. And I will go through some of them, but this is a major fight among countries to get their food branded this way. And I think we're only in the first 20 years of it, but it'll be, I feel, as important as historical sites. It's governed by a treaty, which is the Intangible Cultural Heritage Treaty. I would note that the United States is not yet a signatory to that treaty, but it would be very important because it preserves traditions just the way it preserves sites. So the most successful branding program, and I'm sure many of you who travel or who have clients who travel or work, is Thailand. The Global Thai Program, which was started in 2005, is one of the most powerful ways to draw people to a country. I always wondered, why did I see so many Thai restaurants when I was walking around in Europe or and I couldn't believe that I was even in a small little town in Norway and there was a Thai restaurant. And then as I started to study this area, I learned that the Thai government actually gives foreign nationals loans to open restaurants and brands them as part of the Global Thai Program. And this program became a model for other countries to promote their food and to promote the kitchen of that country in a small kingdom, which people didn't know a lot about. It now is a very popular culinary food destination. The other country which did something similar is Peru. Peru has this campaign, Peru Mucho Gusto. It was started in the 90s. What's interesting about this campaign is it was used to help clean up a country, as they say, that didn't have a good reputation for bringing tourists in because of the conflicts that were going on. There was a guerrilla war going on in the 1980s. It was a dangerous rebel movement. People couldn't go to one of its top sites, Machu Picchu, because it was dangerous to travel on those roads because of potential attacks. Now this is all changed, and the Mistura Fair, which unfortunately has not taken place because of COVID, but will resume hopefully someday again, uses the unique cuisines of the Andes and brings foreign chefs to that effort. There's a wonderful movie about it, but it's once again a successful gastro diplomacy, gastro tourism effort. For any of you who have experienced it, I think it's truly a unique transformation of a country into a culinary destination. I think Peru still remains the #1 culinary destination in Latin America. Korea is an interesting example because Korea took on the challenge of gastrodiplomacy through its trade ministry. So you often have to look at a trade ministry as well as the foreign ministry to see where promotion of food comes from. In this case, what is called kimchi diplomacy, the Koreans used the food sector to promote trade and export of its products, but it also was a successful food campaign. The other country that had a similar issue to Peru is Mexico. I'm sure many of you recall, if you've gone to Mexico, I've gone since I was a teenager, the fear of eating Mexican food, of getting sick. Well, the government of Mexico has changed that all. In 2018, it created a movement called Ven a Comer, Come to Eat, of the foreign ministry, and it was to dispel the idea that food in Mexico is unsafe. And it made Mexico a very unique culinary destination. And anybody who travels through American cities today knows that it's no longer the enchilada fajita crowd, but very special regionalized foods, Oaxacan food, Poblano food from Puebla, with very beautiful types of cuisine. This is important when you want to have people go to Mexico to seek out these destinations. But Mexico was very clever in the way it dealt with this issue. Now, China, which is not a meek power, doesn't need the advertisement, did need a branding campaign in its food because it's such a huge country and the cuisines are so different. Obviously, one of the destinations in Shanghai is a high-end culinary center, but also street food in China, which you see at the bottom, a lot of the dim sums and a lot of the dumplings and people making noodles became a way to attract Western tourists to China. Similarly, India saw its opportunity to use food. And also, this is an interesting component of food being a basis for nonviolence. I often give a talk about the idea of food as a part of peace building, which I really believe, in that you can get people who are normally in a state of conflict to also share a meal. This picture, Indonesia, is a more recent entry to the food destination culinary diplomacy area. And once again, you see beautiful food laid out on tables, making it a very attractive place for people to come. And diplomacy is working there, but the government invests money as well. And the other country, which I find an interesting campaign, is Malaysia, Kitchen of the World. For all its issues in Malaysia, this little tiny country, it used to be Kuala Lumpur, for those of you who remember that, it really is a country of tremendous ethnic diversity. And it is built on this diversity to become a major culinary destination. So what are we talking about with gastrodiplomacy that is important? It's that we're actually trying to link local tastes with global visions. And this picture, which I always like, of Bourdain in China, is a way of showing that the table is really a way to build community. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I think is important is that it explores, gastrodiplomacy really is about borderlessness. Food is really a way about getting entrepreneurs to come out. And it's also a way to get people to look at what is behind the cuisines they're eating. Now, when I also say linking global to local, what I mean specifically is that during the pandemic, we have, in times of crisis, we've also understood how local experts in diaspora communities promote international food trends. And that is one of the most interesting outcomes of this crisis. is that people seek out these international experiences online through classes and more. But another phenomena, and I put in this slide on modern commensality, that's a nice fancy word for coming around the table. It tells you about traveling, and food has become public art. Sharing different cuisines, sitting down in public markets. This is the future of the way people want to eat and meet other people while simultaneously eating food. It's said, and Franz Kafka was said it, you don't fight when you have food in your mouth. And this is what I feel is important. If we get back around the table, we will have an ability to talk things through. Finally, I could not be talking about social gastrodiplomacy without talking about social gastronomy, because social gastronomy is a way to use food and the power of food and gastronomy to address social inequality, to improve nutrition, etc., to educate consumers. The photograph is of a Brazilian chef who was one of the people to coin the term with his students, who mainly come from at-risk groups where he's teaching them to cook. But his group, Gastrodiplomacy, trains people, but offers meals through a refectorio in Rio. I don't know if many of you have heard about the Clink in London, but it is a restaurant. There are two of them in prisons, one in the city of London and the other outside of London, where you can get the most wonderful food prepared by prisoners who are training to become chefs in a post-life. All of this applies to people who want to learn to use food as a tool for good. And for many of you who have not heard about the Clink, you should put it on your destination list if you're going to London, because it is an experience to eat in a restaurant of the equivalent of a Michelin 1-star or 2-star inside a prison. But the important point of all this social gastronomy is that it really does help validate what people are doing to help create a livelihood, to integrate people into society and more. So chefs, I think, if you haven't realized it, have become activists. And you can launch the power of chefs as activists in two ways. This woman on the left in Mara Kitchen is working in Baltimore. She was working in a food hall in Baltimore. Now they're doing two things. They're serving lunches, which they earn money for, but they're also working with contracts to help feed school children because of the closures of school. And of course, we couldn't have a talk about social gastronomy without Jose Andres, who I understand is off today in St. Vincent's. We were supposed to be on a panel later, but he's there feeding people. The World Central Kitchen has become the poster child for social gastronomy in using food as a way to support humanitarianism in times of crisis. And then there's this other movement of chefs as activists, which is the Chef's Manifesto, which is where chefs are actually working to create a model for sustainability. And I know the theme of this year's conference is sustainability, but it's really important to recognize that there are now close to 1,000 chefs around the world who've signed up to this set of 8 principles, and in making the Sustainable Development Goals around food, SDG 2, the Sustainable Development Goal for food and ending hunger by 2030 is what drove this, but there are chefs who are following this on a daily basis. And of course, you have people like Massimo Bottura, as well as your chef in many restaurants around the world who are doing these things. But chefs have moved out and they've been on the barricades now. I think COVID pushed them more to speak up as restaurants closed, but the creativity of people in this area is also how social gastronomy is linked to gastrodiplomacy. So my next slide is, as I said, food builds communities. We all know that. We all know that from travel. This is the Italian pastry chef we cited at the beginning, teaching women in the Sudan how to prepare food with the local products and how to bake with some very difficult ingredients, but also using local farming, local markets, and considering these places as ways to bring tourists in the future together. And finally, I think what I feel is important in sustainability and travel is we have to make peace with nature. Food is a source of climate change. There's no question. Our landfills, if our landfills were a country, it would be the third largest country of emitters of greenhouse gases. But I feel that when you saw that statistic about why people want to go and eat to locally sourced foods, cut groups that are doing sustainable agriculture, we really are working with people who want to travel because they do want to make peace with nature. So I will be happy to take questions. I know we ran through these slides fairly quickly, but I thank you again. This is my contact information. I always learn from you, and I would be happy to, go ahead, and I will stop sharing the screen if I can stop it. Yes.
Johanna, go ahead and keep your screen up there so people
Oh,
can copy your information, or you could also put it in the chat window if you want.
yeah. Okay. I will see if I can bring that up and put that at the end. Let me see. Anyway, thank you, Eric.
No, sure. And also, I would like to encourage anyone to write questions for Johanna, put them in the Q&A window where you can also upvote and comment on questions, and we'll have a look at that in just a minute. Johanna, that was really interesting. And I even learned some things in there, and I really appreciate your insight and your knowledge and your experience. Tell us a little bit about your Conflict Cuisine website. What is it all about? What do you do there, and how can people get more involved?
Well, thank you for asking about that because I started this project not as a food expert or a travel expert. I was someone who was a social scientist and a lawyer who was working on conflict. And what I discovered was something very interesting in my own hometown, that Washington had restaurants that really were emblematic of the conflicts that were taking place around the world. And one congressman once said you could always see where America was at war by what restaurant opened. And it is actually true that that inspired me to think about food as soft power, how from the time Vietnamese came to Washington to the next wave, who were the Afghans who left in 19, I guess it was 79, when the Russians invaded, to the Central Americans, Washington became a center of conflict cuisines. And I said, I could teach a course about that. And so that's how it evolved. But I do teach a course at American University on food as a source of international relations and conflict. And what's was nice until COVID is that students would actually go to restaurants, meet with restaurateurs, often work with them, and then write serious papers about not only the cuisine of the country, but also how the conflict evolved and what types of options for solutions there were. I worked in Turkey most recently for the last 3 years on a project that used food as a tool for entrepreneurship and brought refugees from Syria and many other countries that arrived in Turkey, those Syrians were the largest, to use food as a way to communicate because the languages were so different. And I learned a tremendous amount about the power of food to get people who were not normally going to talk to one another around the table. So that's in a very short, brief nutshell conflict cuisine. And social gastronomy is now something that I really find the power that is driving food today. And people go to festivals that feature refugees, that feature people who are other or different, but use food as a way to integrate.
Mm.
I see there's a question or two in the questions, but you can
Yeah,
probably.
Christina would like to know if you have any roots in the Nordic countries, perhaps because of your Mendelson surname.
Um, I actually, my great grandmother was born in Copenhagen, but that wasn't her
So
surname. But anyway, so
Taylor du
that's,
dansk? Do you speak Danish?
I wish I did. I speak English like all my other fellow Nordics.
Okay, very good.
I have family in Denmark and Sweden.
And we have a question from Thomas in Vienna. There's a project there called Habibi and Haware. Did you hear about that? Refugees working and learning gastronomy there, cooking their recipes from home. They have 3 restaurants and are still growing.
I haven't heard of that one, so I'd love to know about it because the social gastronomy movement tracks these. And I think that that's a very important way to bring people together when there are linguistic differences. Since 2015, when the Syrian refugee crisis started, but is not the only refugee crisis, this type of project of cross-cultural fertilization using food has become a very important livelihood creation for refugees, but also a way for cultures that were not familiar with people from other parts of the world to gain knowledge about the people and created a humanity, a community that didn't exist. So I'd love to learn more about it. You have my email address up on the screen. Please feel to contact me, Ifri, and I will connect them to others who are doing this because it's important work.
Johanna, you had talked about social gastronomy a few times, and that is an entire another organization. Could you talk a little bit about what that is and its implications for what you talked about and also tourism, and then also perhaps how people could learn more about it?
Well, social gastronomy is a pretty simple concept. It's using food not as the end to eat, but as the means to help people survive. And so learning the food or selling the food or creating a cookbook are the means to a livelihood. But what I think is important in tourism, for example, is the example of uh, social gastronomy projects in prisons or in schools where kids at risk are being used. The one in London, I don't know if you've tried it, Eric, the Clink in London,
Not yet.
is an amazing place. You have to make reservations. You can go online. You can't take any cameras in, but the restaurant inside the prison is magnificent. It was built by the prisoners, and there's now a program in the women's prison, and I think it's outside of London, where they're using the prisoners to become caterers. And they actually recently catered the opening of Parliament. So it's run by a chef who was a former Hilton chef. The opportunities are really important in terms of connecting hotels, restaurants with social projects. And these, some of them stopped, but during COVID, I think they became more important because they also helped do carry out and delivery services.
Mm.
But
You know,
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
it's interesting you talking about this, and you said there was another similar restaurant. These restaurants could actually become tourist destinations in their own right. So people who are perhaps not necessarily traveling for the local or authentic food, but traveling for these kinds of social gastronomy experiences, or for example, traveling to Bristol, England, or Portland, Oregon, which have very, very strong vegan, vegetarian cuisine offerings, which you may be hard for other people to find elsewhere, so they feel more comfortable there. But people who are not necessarily traveling just for the authentic cuisine, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that there should be a whole listing of restaurants that offer this kind of meal, but are also benefiting the public. And
Mm,
I don't know if you remember at the Milan Food Expo in 2015, Massimo Buturo was able to get a church to make meals out of the food waste from the expo, not waste in terms of garbage, but just unused food of the day that had to be recycled. And he invited chefs who were participating in the expo to create these dinners for people, for homeless people, for anybody. It was a church near the railway station. The Vatican gave him a space in what was a refettorio. And this started what was the refettorio movement. Now, Bottura opened one in London, he opened one in Paris. The idea was using food, anybody could come in there, but being served by the people who made it, being served by volunteers, and giving people food with dignity,
mm.
not giving people a sandwich in a bag or at a soup line. So these have become extremely important. And people who are traveling could seek these out. They could seek these out as volunteer positions in traveling also, because working with these famous chefs around the world is an option.
Indeed, very interesting. Indeed. There's a question here from France, and we were just talking about traveling for authenticity or not, food authenticity. What do you think about adapting food products for foreigners, such as Thai food abroad may not be similar to Thai food in Thailand? It may become less quote unquote authentic for Thai people tasting it in the US, for example.
Well, I don't want to get into the authenticity debate. The minute you move something out of its uh, place, it changes. I mean, every place has its own terroir, and there's a big discussion about that. But I think food is dynamic. So how you prepare food in one place even if it's prepared by a chef of that nationality, is going to change based on the ingredients, even based on the water you're cooking food in. But that doesn't make it any different that it's not Thai food. It's just interpreted by somebody. It's food is public art. When you make it and create it, it's something that a chef does or a cook does.
Mm.
So it's dynamic, but I don't think that that's a big problem. And many people, as you know, do not enjoy the hot peppers, which are very common in the Thai
Yeah.
food. So I don't see it as a big problem.
Well, it's interesting. I was speaking at a conference just this morning. It was a food tourism conference taking place in Manila. And one of the questions was, how can we get Filipino food to be better known? And I did talk about the Global Thai program as well. And it's kind of the Philippines' nemesis. They've got Thailand, they've got Vietnam, Indonesia is very strong with cuisine, and then Filipino food is not getting the recognition. And they were talking about what they could be doing. And I said, well, look, you have to understand that there's three types of food that you can offer. One is the authentic, and that is, food from the street, food from your homes, not changed at all, with all of the ingredients that may be unusual, all the flavors and smells that may be unusual for people not from your culture. Then you've got fusion, which is maybe like how in Vietnam they the French influence, so there's a little bit of fusion going on there. When I lived in Sydney, I went to an Italian restaurant that also had it was Italian Chinese fusion, which was very interesting. And then you've got Nouvelle cuisine, which is stylized, authentic cuisine, if you will, interpreted by chefs and offered in a different kind of environment. So what kind of cuisine did they want to offer? Was it the authentic? Was it a fusion? Or was it the Nouvelle cuisine? And they said that a lot of the quote unquote Filipino food that's available in Manila, at least, is really more a fusion of Chinese and Filipino. And they were talking about the hegemony of China reaching into Filipino food. And I thought that was interesting. So that's how we came to this discussion. But I guess you really have to ask yourself as a consumer, what type of the cuisine do you want to enjoy?
Well, we know that there's a wonderful book by Rachel Loudon, who's a great scholar at the University of Texas. It's called The Cuisines of Empire. And she argues that it's very hard to throw off imperial influence because China, from Vietnam to the Philippines, all through Asia, had a powerful impact on food. So sometimes I feel countries do this branding campaign to single out something that people didn't know about. And a small state, I mean, Philippines is like Thailand, it's not a small, but has the ability, if it had a branding campaign in its foreign ministry, could distinguish what is unique about it. Everybody knows about lumpia. I mean, it's a variation of an egg roll, but it's very Philippine. And Washington, D.C. now has 3 or 4 Philippine restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a matter of how you brand it. And it does take, I think, support of either trade ministries or foreign ministries. We were recently talking to Turkey about branding their food. It's a wonderful country. It's got great tourism, but you don't see branding campaigns about all the variety of food that's there. So I just think it's a matter of, communications as well.
We were talking about the branding of Filipino food as well. And I did a little research before the talk, and I found CNN Travel, which put together a list of the top 15 Filipino foods. And of the 15 on the list, the only one I had heard of was adobo. Lumpia was not even on the list, which baffled me. But I was showing them, I said, look, it's not that we can't pronounce these words as non-Filipino, it's that we've never seen these words. I mean, we learn words for Thai cuisine or Japanese cuisine or Spanish cuisine, we learn the words, but we just have never encountered these dishes before.
Well, I think you're absolutely right to go to those lists, which I think are kind of amusing sometimes as to who puts them together. But what made Global Thai work was a commitment by the government to put money behind opening restaurants abroad. And so that a Thai citizen or a Thai national living abroad could get a very low interest loan to help open a restaurant. And that promoted it. Alternatively, what the Peruvians did was they launched a major public relations campaign with its new chefs creating new Peruvian cuisine. Everybody knows about Gaston Acurio, and now Virgilio Garcia, who is one of the top restaurants in the world. And a lot of the younger chefs in these countries are really doing research about indigenous foods, about what is being used, the kinds of grains, the kinds of potatoes, and then sharing them with people who come to eat in their restaurants. So I think that connection with the environment, what you're talking about, Eric, that sustainability of how do we keep our foods sustainable, how do we use what we have, how do we preserve our cultural heritage, of which food is very much a central part, is becoming the movement of what is going on around the world.
One last question, and then we can wrap up here. I would like to ask you your opinion about the Peru Mucho Gusto program, because I have always found it interesting and maybe a little strange that a country would spend so much effort focusing on its gourmet assets when the number of seats in a gourmet or Michelin restaurant are very limited. The number of people arriving into the country to eat at those restaurants is very limited. So the economic impact is very, very small. I think the Mistura event arguably has done a better job of branding the country's culinary culture. But what's your opinion of the Peru Mucho Gusto program?
I think it's a really successful program, and maybe this is the political science hat on. Peru had a terrible decades-long guerrilla warfare going on. I'd worked there when I was at the State Department at AID, and you couldn't travel to many of the regions that were really the top tourist sites. You couldn't go to Machu Picchu because there was a danger of the railroad being bombed by the Sendero Luminoso. And I think what they did was they wanted a clean, fresh start in bringing people back to the country. And they did that through food because it was a way to get people around a table. It wasn't threatening. And through food, they were able to attract many, many different types of tourists. So it wasn't only the high-end restaurants, but it was also around the country of showing the benefits of, a country that has 1,000 varieties of potatoes. The potatoes come from Peru. Every potato we eat, whether it's in Indonesia or India, comes from Peru originally. So I do feel they did a really good research job. Their foreign ministry and their Ministry of Commerce and Tourism really said, we're going to start with a clean slate. And it worked. And if you go around the world, I mean, you can have high-end Peruvian cuisine in many cities in this country. In Paris and in Madrid, for example, there are fancy Peruvian restaurants. Peruvian cuisine in Latin America has become the top cuisine. You can go to any major city. Chile is filled with Peruvian restaurants, Colombia.
Yeah.
So it's, like the French food of the 21st century in the Americas. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Yeah, no, it does. It's helpful. When I was in Santiago talking at the National Food Tourism Conference there, and my host was driving me around, and we were talking about the situation. He goes, "Well, we don't even know what Chilean food is." He said, "All of the food that you buy from street food vendors is Peruvian, all of it."
well, there's a power to that influence, but it's also because food is borderless. The borders were created out of the wars of the independence, the beginning of the 19th century, but that doesn't necessarily mean it changed the influences, which were Spanish and indigenous. And Peru has a large indigenous population in the south of the country, and that is another area which I'm sure they'll develop. But things are emerging, and we'll see who will become the next powerful food broker. Brazil,
Indeed.
for example, doesn't have a good branding program.
Brazil is a very interesting study. We have an intern working with us right now from Brazil, and the things that she's helped me to discover about the country. I know a little bit from having traveled there, but I can't really make a statement about the turismo gastronomico there. But she has been very insightful, and we're planning a Latin America roundtable to talk about culinary tourism development on the continent, and I think Brazil will have an important part in that. So.
Well, my students just did a PowerPoint and exercise on setting up a gastrodiplomacy program for Peru, and they focused on the Northeast, which has a very distinct Afro-Brazilian cuisine. But it's true, they could certainly benefit by having that. But like all countries of the region, they're all afflicted by COVID, and people are not traveling there, even to Carnival. So it's not well attended this year, which is not a surprise.
Well, Johanna, I would like to thank you for your time. It's been a true pleasure. I've enjoyed our conversations leading up to this event. And what you have said today is true testimony that we never stop learning. And it really is a true pleasure. Fellow American University alumni, and thank you again. I know how busy you are, and it was really a pleasure working with you, and we appreciate your knowledge.
Thank you for all the participants around the world for joining me, and don't hesitate to send an email. Bye.
Thank you again. All right, we'll
Bye.
see you all in the
Take
next.
care.
Thank you, Johanna. We'll see you all in the next webinar in a few minutes. Bye-bye.
Bye. Take care.